Good afternoon. Welcome to the City Council Informational Meeting. It is Tuesday, September 25th. Call this meeting to order. Our first item up is Land Use Committee update.
Oh, yes, that would be me, and I'm looking for my minutes. Do we have minutes out here? I guess I don't have any of the minutes, but we'll have to. I'm going to pass on that, and I'll give the update at a later time.
We'll do it later. That sounds good.
Thank you.
Next up, sorry about the spur there, Administration Communication. Welcome, Ms. Beck.
Thank you for having me. Erica Beck, Mayor's Office. Just a couple of updates for the council today. The Parks Master Plan Agreement that was brought forward to the council, I believe almost 2 months ago now, on the consent agenda, in which we had proposed to combine those funding sources. We will be bringing that back forward to this body on October 9th through the consent agenda process again. Basically what we've done is we've had the consultant split the agreement into two. So a portion of that will come from capital, a portion of that will come from operating. So hopefully if you have any questions about that, let me know, or let Don Kearney know as well. But that's, again, coming forward on October 9th. Another one, because I know that this group has been very much in tuned to the Glory House and what the Glory House has been working on. I wanted to give you just a brief update on that project and what's going on with that. Very recently, well, actually, I'll start with a little bit of a background for those of you that might not be aware. The city, of course, entered into an agreement with the Glory House in 2017 to sell the ice and rec facility, or that property, to the Glory House for the purchase of constructing housing for their client base. They, in turn, once that agreement was finalized, submitted applications to the South Dakota Housing and Development Authority for some funding that could be used to construct 25 apartment homes on that site. They were awarded that funding in November of 2017. They then have been going through the process of closing on those tax credits with their syndicator and with South Dakota Housing and Development Authority. They recently secured the last financing that they needed to make that project work. And so they have been, just over the past couple of days, submitting all the documentation that they needed to submit to the city, and they will be working with Danny Brown in the city attorney's office to close on that property. In turn, we will be working on demolition of that structure. So next week, most likely, I'll bring forward some additional details on when you can expect to see that start to occur, but I just wanted to let you know where that was, since they were just recently able to finalize their additional financing and move that project forward. Again, that was for 25 units. Their intent long-term was to build a total of 72 units on that site. So most likely what will happen is they will start their project yet this fall, and most likely be done with it by late summer, I would say, next year. That's when it would open, the 25 units. They will also simultaneously be working on another application that will be submitted to the South Dakota Housing and Development Authority. That it'll be submitted in August of next year. They would then find out if they were awarded in November of next year. So at best, the next building would be done in 2021 if they were awarded, assuming they were awarded in the fall of next year. So again, just wanted to provide you an update on that, but I think it just goes to show how many partners are sometimes needed in those efforts to make them work, and then still on top of that, how long it actually takes to get some of these things moving forward. A couple of additional updates. Next week, just as a reminder, at this meeting, at informational meeting, I'm going to be providing the council with a historical summary and overview of tax increment financing in Sioux Falls. So I'll give a brief just synopsis of the 21 districts that we've had to date. I promise brief because I think I only have 30 minutes. So I'll try to get through all of them at a very high level, but if you have any questions or if there are specific things that you think of in between now and then, let me know and I'll make sure to touch on those as well. But of course, you know, I can definitely come back in the future and talk in more detail about any one of those districts too. And the premise behind that presentation is just to make sure that everyone understands how we've utilized TIF in the past, But also, I anticipate that given some of the projects that have been talked about just throughout the community, that we'll most likely be seeing other applications moving forward. And so I want to make sure that this group is understanding of what we've done in the past and how we've utilized that tool so that you know how to ask those questions of us with respect to how it can be utilized in the future. So if there are other programs like that or other policies that we have in place that you need an update on in terms of how we've utilized them in the past and how we could potentially utilize them in the future, let me know that, because I can definitely provide that. Just as an example, by the end of the year, my intent is to bring forward the same type of update on property tax abatement. I know that that got brought up a couple of meetings ago with respect to David Billion's project downtown and what that and how that is in terms of differentiation from TIF. And so my intent is to bring that forward to this group as well, potentially even with some discussion on proposed changes that we'd like to bring forward and recommend to this group for further consideration. If you don't have any other questions, that's all I had for today.
Councillor Staley.
Since you're giving us this wonderful prediction of things to come, I'm just
Yes.
wondering again, where are we at with the Huey building?
I actually don't have an update on that. I've been told that the group that has it under contract still has it under contract and are evaluating what they can do without access to that alley.
Just interestingly for me, I got the impression that if that thing hadn't passed, that the whole deal was going to fall through. So that's why it was just seemed like it was a time-sensitive thing.
Yeah, it was time sensitive in the sense that they have that land or that building under contract until the end of the year. And the way that their financing works is they wanted to get started on the project immediately following that. And so in order to get the financing secured, they needed to know exactly what it was that they were going to be doing with the building. So if you work backwards from that close date of December 31st, that's kind of the time frame that they were under and why they brought that forward when they did.
Councillor Starr.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I was curious about, you talked about the Glory House. What are our immediate plans then for the other half of the property? One of the things that we had discussed was surplusing it and bringing it forward. Is that still the plan, or what are we thinking?
Right, we actually just scheduled time for early next week to talk about that internally. I can't actually tell you exactly what was done on that. Unfortunately, I wasn't here at the time, but I do remember vaguely the discussion. So I think we just need to talk about that internally and determine what the next steps are. We have had a conversation with the Glory House to determine whether or not, that might be of interest to them in the future. And interestingly enough, while the property is in a unique location, I think they feel as though if you get too many units on site that are all targeted toward one demographic and specifically their clientele, that might be a challenge for them. So we need to have some more conversations with them, but also adjacent property owners too. So once we kind of get that squared away, we'll definitely bring that back to the council for additional consideration and thought, because I don't know if the land was actually surplused all at the same time, or if we need to bring that back in order to do that.
Now I shook my head yes, but I'm not sure that I am correct if we did that all at the same time. The other thing is that there was some talk at the time of maybe a job training facility or some type of thing that would work in hand with what they were doing, and I know that was an aggressive fundraising effort for them at the time, but maybe they're seeing some success. The other that I was curious about, who is the partner, the bank for the tax swap or the tax credit thing? Was it, I heard and I forgot it,
Yep,
so I wanted to make sure.
Midwest Bank.
Midwest is the partner?
Right. They are who will be financing the project for the Glory House.
I did suggest that maybe we could each grab a sledgehammer and take a swing at that building and as a fundraiser per swing, but I was reminded that it probably wouldn't be the safest way to use our time, so they were going to use the old-fashioned approach and just ask for money and have a dinner like they are Thursday evenings. So.
Very good.
Thank you.
Councillor Brecky.
I just want to take the opportunity to, I guess, speak with my fellow council members about the Glory House project. And it is a project that I'm really proud that the council was involved in. I happen to have extra information about that project because I sit on the Chamber Appeals Committee, and we approved that for the Chamber Fund Drive. And so I learned about that project and what they're doing, and I'm so glad that the council embraced that. But just a few little known facts. I don't know if you know that the Glory House's success rate is actually higher than Hazelton's. They have a 62% success rate, whereas Hazelton boasts of a 60% success rate, which are both very high in the addiction industry. Part of it has to do with the fact that their services are now able to be provided all on their campus. I mean, when these houses go in, these people are going to be able to stay there for up from 6 months or 3 months up to 3 years if necessary. They don't expect a lot of 3-year people. It'll be more in that 3 to 6 range, but they'll have a reasonable rent, a $300 maximum rent, so they can save money, get out of their bad environments, because they have the federal contracts that actually deal with the people who have been incarcerated, and then get out of their environments, get back on track. They'll be able to walk across the campus to their AA meetings, walk across the campus to their treatment, be able to hold a job, and that's part of why they're so successful. With these new 2 structures, they have set their goal at 75%. They believe they can have a 75% recovery rate because of the convenience and again, the ability to keep people from going back into the back pattern. So I just felt like I'd be remiss. I know you don't want me to take up your time, but I just think that it was just be fun to tell you all that extra information. I'm so happy that you guys were supportive of that program. I'm so glad you're talking about what else we might do to that campus to create. It's just such a good opportunity. And, with the treatment issues, you always face NIMBY, but out there, it's already there. So I think we have to just take a really careful look at how we might capitalize on that. And I'm glad you're doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so next is open discussion, City Council open discussion. Any open discussion? Councilor Staley.
Well, I wanted to take this opportunity to thank you for those of you who reached out about my mother. She had a catastrophic stroke about 2 weeks ago, and last week we thought she could die at any time. She's in what's called a comfort care status. So I was able to spend 5 nights with her last week. It was wonderful, quality time. So right now yesterday she was transferred to a nursing home, and she's on a liquid diet. So I heard it's could be any day. So anyway, I appreciate your prayers. And I also appreciate the staff, Dave Bixler and Tom Greco and Jim David, for helping to facilitate the conference call last week. I rarely miss a meeting. I take this very seriously, but I did want to spend that time with my mother. I didn't want her to die alone. If that was the case, that was going to happen. So they helped me to do that. I thought it worked out well. And I just want to say thank you for the respectful treatment that I've gotten from you, as always. And thank you. Continued prayers are appreciated.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Kiley.
Would you like the land use report?
Sure, we're all on pins and needles.
Okay, I bet you are. We did have a report by Jeff Schmidt, Chief Planning and Zoning Official, on the 2018 Citizens Planning Academy, which is actually already filled, but that's going to be held on October 1 and October 29th. But if there are individuals that are still interested, you're encouraged to contact the planning office. And then we had a discussion on street and right-of-way vacations, and Chief of Staff Erica Beck had presented that to us along with City Engineer Chad Heavey and Director of Planning Mike Cooper, and they talked about South Dakota codified law, and also presented City of Sioux Falls right-of-way vacation policy, and discussed right-of-ways that have been vacated since 2010. And that's it, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Next item is presentation history of internal audit by Councilor Greg Neitzer, who is also the chair of the audit Committee. Welcome, Councilor Neitzer. I would ask if the council can refrain from any questions till the end. We do have to adjourn by 4:45 and allow 15 minutes for public input. If there is no public input, we will allow additional questions from the council to continue on, but we do have to adjourn by 4:45. Take it away.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. Greg Neitzer, City Council, Northwest District. We're going to try to roll through this because we are on a tight time frame. The Internal Audit Division of the City Council has now been in existence for 12 years. It predates all of us on the City Council for a number of reasons. Now is a great time to review what internal audit is, where it came from, and for us to discuss what it should look like going forward. With me today are the current audit staff, Abby Vandelinati, our full-time internal auditor, as well as Rich Oxel, who is the first council-hired city auditor, who has returned to work for us part-time. I created this presentation from a number of newspaper articles from the 2004 to 2006 time period, interviews with city councilors, 3 or 4 of them, I think, who were there during the formation of our internal audit division, discussions with Rich, who was there, as well as various source documents from audit, city ordinances, and audit charter. Note that there's a number of additional slides at the end of this presentation, and I'm going to urge you to look at those offline. We can't get through all of them. A lot of it has some of the kind of the deep down history of what happened in internal audit. So the current status of the audit division, we have 3 FTEs, an internal audit manager, 2 staff auditors. As you know, the internal audit manager is currently vacant. One of our staff auditor positions is vacant. She was promoted to finance, and then we have 1 full-timer and 1 part-time as stated. I am the audit chair, and I am the acting manager, at least in spirit. Just to review and get the council and the public up to speed on where we're at, as stated, Ashley moved over to finance. And again, we have Rich on board, who's kind of doing a jack of all trades for us. He's kind of doing whatever I need him to do and helping out with I'd say, some audit duties and some sort of internal audit manager duties, and it's very helpful to have him with us. So the big question, what do we want from audit? We need to ask ourselves, what do we want from the internal audit division going forward? What are our priorities? What should the mission statement be? What is its reason for being, and what can they do for us? Answering the critical question, what do we want from audit, will drive and direct our decisions and direction going forward. Everything flows from this question. Once we nail this down, things will fall into place, and how we should proceed will become clear. After this presentation, you will hopefully be very clear as to where internal audit came from and what the council wanted. But we need to ask ourselves, if we were creating an internal audit again today, what would we want from it? So let's define some basic terms since we are not auditors. What is internal auditing? It's an independent, objective assurance and consulting activity designed to add value and improve an organization's operations. It helps an organization accomplish its objectives by bringing a systematic, disciplined approach to evaluate and improve the effectiveness of risk management, control, and governance processes. Big mouthful. That's the definition from the IIA. So it's important to understand the difference between what external auditors do and internal auditors do. What they do and what we should expect from them are different. Internal auditors evaluate and recommend ways to improve the effectiveness of the city's controls and processes, do performance and financial audits, and look at business practices and risk, whereas an external auditor analyzes financial statements and records to ensure reporting is accurate. I think sometimes when we hear audit, we just think of somebody just digging through the financial records and just making sure that all of the numbers add up and there wasn't money that was embezzled, and that's part of it, but there's a lot of things that can be done procedurally to help us out. Who benefits from an internal audit? Well, management, which is the administration in our case, the governing board, which is us, the city council, and the shareholders, which in this case in a government is taxpayers. The internal audit function provides value to all 3. It's not just the city council. So, an internal audit function makes the organization and management better by identifying risk areas and weaknesses, by providing consultation, ensuring risks are managed appropriately, and by providing recommendations for improvement. A good internal audit division has a good relationship with management and helps them to be better and is a trusted advisor, not an adversary. They provide assurance to the City Council that risks are properly managed, ensures adequate controls are in place, ensures that the laws, regulations, and policies that we pass are being followed, and provides a check and balance on the administration by putting a cop on the beat, as it were. And it benefits the taxpayers by instilling confidence in city government. It protects tax dollars from waste, fraud, and abuse, and it promotes efficiency and good government, and it promotes accountability and transparency. So where did the need for internal audit come from? That came from something that happened back in 2004. But before what happened in the city of Sioux Falls, there was a major theft of money at Southeast Technical Institute. It raised some important questions, and in fact, one of the city staff at the time wrote a letter to the city attorney saying that in light of this, this brings up that we really don't have internal controls. We really need to do something. And that was really kind of a prescient comment. That came just months before the Phillips to the Falls issue. And then we had the Phillips to the Falls issue, which was a major controversy, and we had Pasley Park Railroad underpass, which was major budget overruns, which we will get to. The big issue was the City Council was forced to appropriate money it did not initially approve, and after it was spent, they were put in the position of being asked for forgiveness after the fact. So as spoken about, in 2004, there was a major theft at STI by a longtime 16-year employee. He stole $785,000 before being caught. He took checks that should have been deposited into the bank account for STI and diverted it into his own bank account. He got 17 years in prison for that. They did not have an internal audit function. An outside audit after the fact identified that they had no internal audit division, a lack of internal controls, and a lack of segregation of duties that led to the theft. They had him doing everything, and they trusted him. In 2002 to 2004, we did have a city audit function. We did. But it was a small group of employees in finance, which Rich was part of, but they didn't have a clear direction, and they were not independent of the administration. They didn't have a lot of support. They weren't terribly effective, and I could let Rich talk about that at some point if you'd like to know about that. In 2004, the city audit coordinator, as I spoke about before, sent a memo to the city county attorney expressing concern regarding a lack of internal controls and a lack of check and balances. And then we had the Phillips to the Falls controversy. This CIP project and its cost overruns was the genesis of the internal audit division we have today. The Pasley Park Railroad underpass occurred at the same time and was part of this episode. So December 2004, the administration is forced to ask the City Council for budget authority to spend money after it had already been spent because of major cost overruns and change orders. The City Council was notified in November of 2004 of this issue. However, the mayor had entered into a contract that put Phillips to the Falls $1 million over budget in February of 2004. And there was additional spending and contracts signed over that year without the council being notified. And it did turn out that everybody, their people in the administration did know about it, and they waited to tell the council until they had no choice. Throughout 2004, several contracts were signed and money was spent that wasn't authorized, driving Phillips to the Falls and the Pasley Park underpass way over budget. Although the mayor initially indicated he didn't know about it until year end and came to the council once he knew, documents discovered later proved that he knew as early as February of 2004 of the problem, but waited until November to notify the council. This led to a major crisis in city government. Details of that crisis are in my slides at the end if you'd like to look that over. So, what did the City Council do about it? They had to decide what to do, and what they decided to do was to address the issues going forward rather than punishing the sins of the past. To that end, they contracted an independent audit of CIP projects over the last 10 years. They had the DLA, the Department of Legislative Audit, do that audit. So they looked at 15 projects. Of those 15 projects, 11 of the projects overspent their approved budget. And that was from the formation of the new form of government up until 2004. So this was not a one-time thing. This had been going on for several years. Of those 15 projects, 13 of the projects had obligations in excess of their approved budget. So a project had overspent its approved budget every year from 1995 to 2004. It wasn't a one-time thing, spanned several years and 2 administrations. It just got larger and bigger as the years went on. There were violations of city charter and city law, and Violations of city charter and state law, spending more than appropriated, failing to notify the council of the problem without delay, spending in departments that exceeded the yearly authorization, and one instance where even the second penny was over-obligated for the year. The major findings were that internal controls were lacking over budgetary accountability for CIP projects. Reports given to the City Council were not in sufficient detail for the Council to detect problems as the situation developed. In 2000, an internal control was removed. The Finance Department was removed from the approval process for CIP project expenditures, changes, and contract approvals, and was consolidated into Public Works. And what you ended up happening was Public Works was approving and overseeing its own projects. Recommendations from the DLA. City Council should receive regular reports of CIP projects, departmental and fund balances to monitor spending and have early warnings of trouble. And that is one of the reasons why we now have the monthly financial report. Council should receive a report of any carryovers to future years. That's in the financial report. Restore Finance Department in the approval process of CIP project expenditures and change orders, which has been done. City Council should establish an audit committee. It would represent the City Council's first line of defense with respect to the city system of internal controls. Committee should have city councilors and financial industry experts, should be responsible for activities of the internal auditor, and the hiring and firing of the internal auditor should be under the authority of the committee, not of the administration for independence, which is how it's done in most organizations. It's important to note all recommendations from the 2005 state DLA audit were eventually implemented. An internal audit report on budget adjustments and transfers in 2008 stated all budget adjustments and transfers of appropriations were done accurately, timely, in accordance with city charter and executive orders. In plain English, the Phillips to the Falls issue was not occurring anymore. And the same thing was found in a 2010 report where they looked at it. And now we have additional safeguards today. We have the full-time City Council budget analyst. We have a legislative operations manager. The city clerk is back under the council, who was not under the council at the time. We get the monthly financial reports. And now we get the change orders and contracts reported to the council on the consent agenda, which was not done at the time. So what did we do? We created the audit committee and we created the audit division. So we created the audit committee first, and that reported to the City Council, and they took care of hiring us our first internal auditor, which was Rich Oxel, and then it eventually expanded to 3 FTEs, and we created our audit charter. The charter sets forth the mission and scope of work of internal audit, promotes effectiveness and efficiency in city government. We want to identify risk, ensure adequate internal controls are in place, and ensure accountability. The lead auditor is supposed to do an annual risk assessment of the city, develop an annual audit plan, deliver reports to the audit committee and city council, coordinate the external audit of the city, follow up on audit recommendations, investigate reported issues of fraud, and help management become more efficient. So the internal audit division has unrestricted access to city records, property, and personnel. They can obtain assistance and cooperation from city personnel and the divisions being audited, and they can implement and execute an audit plan. And again, they have independence because the audit manager reports to the audit committee, not the administration. So the administration cannot hire or fire the auditor. So this is the big part. What do we want from internal audit? These are the possibilities that we could be thinking about. Proactive risk mitigation, performance audits, financial audits, compliance audits, reactive audits when problems arise, fraud detection and investigation, consulting services to city departments, financial analysis, and budget services. So again, the critical question is, what do we want from internal audit today going forward? The bullets on this slide are examples of what an internal audit can provide. They could do a number of these things for us. It's really up to us. With changes in city government, our council organizational structure, some of these may or be duplicative of other staff that we have, I would argue. For example, our budget analysts. So some of those things on here might be covered by our budget analysts, so maybe we don't want to be duplicating that. So as the audit chair, what I'm looking to get from you is, what do you want from audit? What do you think their reason for being should be? So that's kind of your homework assignment, to be thinking about that. I'm proposing that we answer that critical question, and from there we can do the following: review and revise or create new policies, ordinances, and processes that will guide internal audit, all directed to that mission and the reason for being. And we can create policies and procedures that don't exist today, so we have more structure and formality where necessary. And once we get that framework in place, I think then it's time that we go find a new lead auditor or internal audit manager, whatever we wish to call it. Different places call it different things, to lead the organization. Once we have the new lead auditor in place, we can fill the remaining auditor position. I expect personally for this to be a months-long proposition, not weeks. I believe we should take this slow and we should do it right. In closing, I'm hoping to get direction from all of you regarding what do we want from internal audit. What is its reason for being, and what should it be? I also have Rich and Abby here. If you want to ask them any questions, Rich can help with some of the historical items if you need some help with that. And if we have any time, we can answer questions. And again, I would direct you to those additional slides, which I'm not going to go over, which kind of really digs deep into kind of the Phillips to the Falls issue. But this is more about looking forward and asking what do we want out of audit rather than getting into a deep, deep discussion of what happened many, many years ago. But it's important to understand what happened to know where audit came from and what can happen if you let internal controls slip. So with that, I hope I did it in time.
Thank you, Counselor. It is 4:30, which means we do have to allow for public input. I will honor the public input right now, and then we'll turn it over to the council to make sure that we check that box. Is there anyone here that would like to address the council in regards to the presentation you just heard? Seeing none, public input is closed, and we'll turn it over to the council. Councilor Staley.
I was able to attend my first audit committee meeting yesterday, and having been there in the past years as a council member watching from the audience, I have to say it was one of the most exciting, engaged meetings I've attended. Great dialogue. And we were talking about the priorities, and we were talking about what we might want to see going forward. And one thing that Councilor Neitzer just had in the slides is this phraseology that I think is so important. This is to be independent of the administration. And I remember when this happened. I remember when we formed this. And so we have to be very careful about keeping that division there, I do believe. Now, when we were talking about the priorities, did you want to say something? Okay, we were talking about the priorities moving forward. And one of the things that came up that to me was so exciting, and I think the group, if you watch the video, they were excited as well and engaged. We were talking about how does the city prevent, detect fraud before it occurs. And last year was the first time I had ever heard that our city has a fraud hotline. I hadn't known about that. And one of the committee members agreed that we need to do more to publicize that number within the city government, to encourage people to report on that. Now, Rich told us yesterday that service costs about $2,000 a year, and we get 2 to 3 phone calls on it. So it's not like it's being abused. But I think that we need to have that put out in a citywide email frequently just to encourage our employees to be on the watch for that. I also suggested yesterday that we make that number public and put that out to the public, that if you, because maybe a spouse knows about something, maybe a relative, and that way we encourage people to be the eyes and the ears of what's happening within our city government. Also, we were talking about what should the topics for an audit be? And someone suggested that we ask the administration what that should be, and I was kind of coming up against that a little bit to say, well, why are we asking them what they want to be audited on? I mean, that to me should be an independent energy. However, I did suggest that we put that question out to the city employees and to say, do you have any suggestions of a department or an area that could be audited? Because that would give them a chance to maybe shine a little light on something that they have questions about without being considered a whistleblower, so to speak. So I'm hoping that as we move forward, those would be the things that were very appealing to me, and I think our citizens would appreciate that effort.
Madam Chair, could I
Yes.
cover just a couple of those issues real quick? The first, independence is very important, and that's why it's very important that your internal auditor cannot be hired or fired except by your committee or your council and not by the administration. The one thing I do want to point out is that I think sometimes people hear independence and they assume that the audit group is completely removed from the organization, where in other organizations it's not the case. They're, except for the fact that they're hired or fired, essentially through and through they're employees of the organization. They're in it, they're paid by it, so I think we just want to be a little careful that, I think even we actually started running down a path where we got ourselves into a little bit of trouble because there was almost a sense that they were almost a body unto themselves almost. And so I think we just have to be careful about that. So independence is important, but we have to be careful not to carry it too far. As far as the fraud hotline, I did talk to the administration today, and I did get their blessing to send out on behalf, and we'll figure out who we'll put as a contact, but the city council or the audit committee, something on our side of the fence, a citywide email that's going to remind there's a fraud hotline and have that verbiage, and we can figure it out, and I can run it through everybody in the audit committee and make sure everybody likes what they see and everything. So that would be the first start, so we can send that out, and they were completely in support of that. And maybe there's some other things we can do to kind of remind people about that every so often. We do need, if we were to open it to the city, we would obviously have to look at the contractual obligations and see what that would cost. We could definitely look at that. And then the other thing I do want to touch, and the survey, I was going to still look into if we could do like a survey of the whole city, of every city employee. I have to ask them if they have anything they'd like to share. The other thing I would touch on, it's something Rich could touch on better than I'm sure, but when you look at developing an audit plan, there's multiple things you look at, and one of the things you do is you sit down with obviously the organization, because it's supposed to be a collaborative thing, because you want to make it better. It isn't the only thing you do, but you'd sit down with the directors and say, what do you see as risk areas? What are you worried about? Because they have a pulse on that, and I think in many recent years they've brought probably some very good ideas that have been items. Now, that's not the only thing that you do. You don't just take just what they say, but that would be one component of many, and I could let Rich speak to that more if anybody wanted to.
Sounds good. Councilor Kiley.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I think history has proven that the establishment of the audit committee was a good move on the part of the city council, and there is this need that existed then still exists today. It serves a very important purpose. And I think everything that you have up on the screen right now are which you have listed as possibilities. What do we want from our internal audit? Obviously, every one of those would apply to what we should be getting out of our internal audit. And as you mentioned, maybe some of it overlaps with potentially what Dave Bixler does, but I still see all of this applying toward our internal auditors. I think what we need to do is maybe clarify some of the processes involved in internal audit, who's actually in control, in charge of the hiring and the firing, because in the past there's been some question over that. And so the review of even the charter might be necessary because a lot of that's established in charter. And then I think what's really going to be a key for us as a council is to improve the working conditions for our auditors as well. They've been lacking, to say the least, in the past, and we need to provide more for them and the support, not only in the environment, but the support that they need. So I firmly believe that we need to continue to move forward, and we do need to get that lead auditor or audit manager or supervisor, whatever what term we'd like to establish. We need to review the salaries and make sure that they are on par with what the salaries are regionally. And then obviously, I do believe that we need to hire our second internal auditor, so that we're back to full force where we should be. And I'd really like to thank Rich Oskol for coming back and assisting. It has been extremely valuable. And also, Nothing but good things to say about Abby as well for sticking it out when it would have been very easy to give up on us. And one of the reasons she hasn't has been because of you, Counselor Neitzer, and the efforts that you have made here, demonstrating that Abby is of value, and this whole department, this whole audit committee, and all of our internal auditor employees are valued as well. So job well done, Counselor.
Thank you. I really appreciate all of that, and I'm immensely grateful that Abby stuck it out as well, and I've gotten to know her, and she's a wonderful person, and Rich has been a wonderful help. I do want to mention, as far as it was mentioned, when as this was going along, I've thought about, do you keep an internal audit? Do you not keep an internal audit? I now firmly believe an organization this big needs to have an internal audit. It can be very seductive, and Rich could talk about this, to eliminate an internal audit and say, it's overhead, you can't prove how much it saves the city because they haven't found a fraud in the last 5 years. Very seductive to do that. And then internal controls are going to start to slip and slip and slip because it's going to be easy. Hey, if we remove this step out of the process, we can streamline things. We'll get stuff done faster. Well, guess what? Sometimes, like a Phillips to the Falls happen, you remove one link, in that check and balance, and boom, there you are. So, and as was stated, again, it's the cop on the beat. It's having an organization know that there's somebody that might come and audit you and might come and take a look at it, and just having that accountability and just having that oversight is, I think a worthwhile investment. Not to mention the fact it isn't about just finding fraud, it's about finding efficiency. If they can come in and do an audit and say, hey, if you make these changes, we may save money, or they tell them to put in an internal control. We can't prove what fraud didn't happen because they put in that control. How much money did they save? You can't prove it, but it's got to happen.
Councilor Starr.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councilor Neitzer. You have done an incredible job of pulling us out of the fire, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it. What I think you were asking for input earlier, and I think from my position of watching this and where we're at, I think we know what we're looking for in an audit manager, and I think some of that leadership has to come from them. I think the things that are on the list are a big part of what we would do, but I think by having that manager who is that full-time professional, that this is what they think of every day, and that we would proceed as quickly as possible to filling that position. I think that we've put an undue burden on you as well. I know you've enjoyed getting to know the process, and I appreciate how you've dug into it. But at the same time, I think we're at a position that we can't. I'm a firm believer in this office and this group as well of what it needs to do, and to go forward fully staffed, I think would be a big priority for this counselor to move us in that direction. I think Counselor Kiley was exactly right. We do have some work to do with the latest salary study that we did and make sure that we're getting the type of person, but I think it's going to take a little time to recruit, and I think the job description of what we are looking for in a history and a background of the person is there. I don't think it's something that we need to recreate. We just need to find the right person, and again, in my opinion, getting it filled as quickly as possible. The assistant or the next auditor, however we're calling it, probably isn't as big a priority as that will be their hire and someone to fill out their team. But again, my position is that we get this position filled as quickly as possible and that we continue to work towards that.
Sure, and I think that's fair. I think what I would just want us to look at doing is at least reviewing the HR-related components and firming those up, which I don't think necessarily is going to take that long. Just making sure we have some of those controls in place of, again, how do we hire, how do we fire, who does performance reviews. Firm that up, and then you can bring somebody in, and like you said, you bring in the right person, they're going to provide a lot of that leadership and guidance. I'm not an auditor, and so, somebody like that could give us some direction. So
Councilor Brecky.
Yeah, first of all, Greg, thanks for all the work that you've done on this. It's certainly been helpful to me. I've talked several times about filling in the 14-year gap, because this committee did not exist, when I worked for the city. So understanding what it did, was all brand new to me. When I looked at the slide, the one that's still up about what do we want from it, I mean, my initial reaction was, well, all of the above, and it sounds like that puts me in step with Councilmember Kiley. But I also would ask you, because I know you've done the work, and you've looked at other audit committees, that other cities have audit committees, especially larger cities, cities our size, and in putting together this list, I'm assuming you looked at, what other cities have and do, and is this kind of where you got this compilation?
It was between that, a little consultation with Rich, and then just looking at some of the documents on the IIA and ALGA, and it's kind of, I think it's probably fair to say audit can be a little bit all over the place.
And I suppose in part too, it probably depends on the size of the city and again, the circumstances under which, they evolved. I mean, there's certain things, but it looks to me what you've put together here is kind of that well-rounded, comprehensive piece that really provides all the services that we really need as a city this size. And then the other thing I would just add is, again, when you talk about checks and balances, of course, that's when my ears perk up, because you're so right. I mean, in so many areas, it can be the most innocent thing. If you don't have those checks and balances placed, it could just be a matter of expediting or streamlining and nobody realizing the impact that that's going to have in the long term. And that's all over government. So, I mean, I do believe that, even in saying that, you make a great case for why it should have it, and also that just knowing that somebody's watching, that always makes such a big difference. And we are such a large city now, and we really have to act like it. So thanks for all the work. I appreciate, understanding, now I really do feel like I have a full and clear understanding. Also what happened that actually drove just a real nice detailed explanation of what happened that drove the origination of the committee. So thanks for all your work, and I look forward to working with you as we put things back in place.
Thank you. And take a look at those appendix slides. That gets into deep detail of what happened, which I didn't want to go all over. But very, very good point. A lot of things are done with very good intentions. Hey, we'll speed up the process. There's no nefarious intent, but sometimes it's a control that ends up being critical, and bad things can happen.
Councilor Staley, we have 1 minute and then we have to adjourn.
I see you have a performance audit on there. Now, I've checked into that in the past, and I thought that was a specialized audit that you'd have to get an outside firm to do.
Yeah, I might have maybe Rich try to answer that real quick if we have time.
Sure, and as he's coming to the podium, I will say we have a fairly light informational meeting next week, so if we need to add Audit Review 2.0 next week to continue the conversation as we are missing 2 people, we can add that next week. So consider that as a council. We have that opportunity. Go ahead.
Yeah, sometimes we'll call them operational audits, but we can do those, and we have done them in the past. But you can hire consultants too, especially if it's, I know some cities have hired a consultant to basically study their fleet operation or their police department or something like that, and basically do a performance audit. They may call it a study, but it's basically what it is.
Well, and I think we talked about this yesterday, but just at the Municipal League convention last year, it was in the fall, they talked about how difficult it is when you have employees such as yourself auditing other employees, that it can become a real tricky. So sometimes it's nice to have somebody come in from the outside and have a fresh set of eyes on something.
Thank you, Councilor. So we can continue. We will kind of talk amongst ourselves and see if we need to add it up. I'd just like to also add my appreciation for all the work that you've done, Councilor Neitzert. One question I have, if I may, in regard to the audit division, if you will, department has its own charter. And so as far as changing something like that, how difficult is it does that come from the council? Does it come from your audit committee? How is that changed?
I read that a few days ago. I'm going to look at Rich, but I think all it says is it just needs to be approved by the audit committee, any change to the charter. I don't think it's that
difficult. Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure, because when we say charter, sometimes we assume city charter, and that goes through the vote of the people, and it's much more cumbersome to make a change.
Yeah, I think it's just a simple majority, presumably, because it doesn't really say. It just says approved by the audit committee.
Sounds great. Thank you, and I encourage all the councilors to continue to reach out to Councilor Neitzert with additional feedback as far as changes you'd like to see or comments or suggestions. Thank you, Rich, for being here. Thank you, Abby, for being here. We appreciate you sticking it out with us, and good things to come. We will start in 10-ish minutes, about 11 minutes. We will start our next city-county joint meeting, and we'll adjourn at this time. Thank you.